This was published in 2009. And this isn't the first time these ideas were ever considered. This is simply a snapshot of where US policy towards overthrowing Iran was back in 2009. And they had all of the options that they had already been working on for years, I would say even decades, since the 1970s, 1979 onward. And if you look at the options, diplomatic options, an offer Iran shouldn't refuse, persuasion, and they admit in the paper, and I've gone over this many times, they admit in the paper that this isn't actually about trying to arrive at a diplomatic solution. It's about pretending that the US tried diplomacy before shifting toward regime change, wars of aggression, bombing, even going as far as invading Iran. And what they're describing in this 2009 paper was the so-called Iran nuclear deal, which was eventually signed under the Obama administration. And they admit that the deal would be signed, the US would not honor it, they would just pretend to. They would blame its failure on Iran and then use that as a pretext for putting more pressure on Iran, which is literally what the Trump administration did afterwards. They unilaterally withdrew, blamed Iran for violating the deal. No evidence was ever presented or provided, and then they used that as a pretext to begin their maximum pressure policy, which was always the plan, no matter who won the election, whether it was President Trump or President Clinton, didn't matter. It was going to be maximum pressure. Continuing in the table of contents, disarming Tehran, the military option going all the way, invasion, the Asarak option, airstrikes, leave it to Bibi, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. And in here, they say, we will use Israel to attack Iran, and Israel will absorb all of the blame, all of the retaliation, and the US will get what it wants and keep its hands clean. Even if the US joins in after Israel attacks Iran, the US will still be able to keep its hands clean, at least in terms of shifting blame and retaliation. That was 2009, and that is literally what just happened last year. Verbatim, that is exactly what happened. And I've had people tell me, Brian, that's a 2009 policy paper. It's completely irrelevant. Don't you think anything has changed? Read the paper and look at what has happened, and you tell me if anything has changed. The answer is no, nothing has changed. The US pursues these policy objectives no matter who is in the White House and no matter who controls Congress, and the proof is right there in front of you in black and white. All of these options versus what has happened right before our very eyes over the last several years. Here, toppling Tehran, regime change, the Velvet Revolution, they're talking about color revolution, supporting a popular uprising, but then again, you read the chapter, and they admit all of these opposition groups the US is backing are completely unpopular. Okay, but they need to convince the public that they are popular. Inspiring an insurgency, supporting Iranian minority and opposition groups. And in that chapter, they talk about supporting U.S. State Department listed foreign terrorist organizations, including Mujahideen al-Khaliq, which killed, and they admit in the paper, they killed American civilians, they killed American military personnel. They're absolutely terrorists. Since then, they've killed other people in absolute unjustifiable terrorism, but they are a great proxy to use, and the US should remove them from the foreign terrorist organization list so that the US government could give them more public and broader support. And then a few years later, they literally delisted Mujahideen al-Khaliq, even though they're still absolute terrorists, and they're actually carrying out terrorism inside Iran. And then, of course, they have the coup supporting a military move against the regime. And what they admit is, yes, we're going to covertly support armed groups to carry out terrorism and violence inside Iran to overthrow the government, or at least tie up the government's, deplete their resources in essentially a campaign of attrition where you're throwing all of these things at Iran until something cracks. And that is exactly what we just watched. So a 2009 paper describing verbatim what we just watched take place in Iran. The paper contains an entire chapter titled The Velvet Revolution, Supporting a Popular Uprising. I showed you that. And also Inspiring an Insurgency, Supporting Iranian Minority and Opposition Groups, as well as a chapter literally titled Leave it to Bibi, Allowing or Encouraging an Israeli Military Strike. And this is what they stated. This is a quote from the paper. The United States would encourage and perhaps even assist the Israelis in conducting the strikes themselves in the expectation that both international criticism and Iranian retaliation would be deflected away from the United States and onto Israel, a scenario that would unfold verbatim mid last year. That is literally what happened last year. Regarding U.S. engineered unrest, the 2009 paper proposes using U.S. State Department listed foreign terrorist organizations, including the Mujahideen al-Khaliq, MEK. The paper admits is highly unpopular, very unpopular. I mean, they cannot stress enough how unpopular they are inside Iran, that they had killed American citizens and military personnel in the 1970s, and has most certainly carried out terrorism against others since, but that it would be removed from the U.S. FTO list in order for the U.S. to provide greater and more open support. And then in 2012, and look at this article, if you don't read the policy papers and you don't think in the long term and see how this is all connected, and if you cannot ignore a Republican in office, the Democratic Party candidate in office, if you cannot see through this, you cannot see the continuity of agenda. But here, 2012, the 2009 paper says delist MEK, 2012, US removes Iran group MEK from terror list. All right, if you're actually reading the policy papers and following along year to year, and you ignore the political theater that is taking place that's meant to distract you from seeing continuity of agenda, you will see all of this, and you will see clearly years ahead of time what is going to happen before anyone else does. It's very simple to do. And so in 2012, MEK was delisted under the Obama administration after years of lobbying from neoconservatives who would later line President Donald Trump's first administration. So the Obama administration delisted them. Who was lobbying for them? These are the people who are lobbying for them. Giuliani, Bolton, Newt Gingrich, all of these people in this article, they spent years lobbying for MEK, who are terrorists and who had killed American civilians, civilian contractors in Iran, and also military personnel in Iran. And they were lobbying for them, and then all of these people were brought into the Trump administration during his first term. And now he has all of the same type of people in his second administration, and some of these people had also lobbied for MEK as well.